We have been monitoring elections over the last 10 years. And the first thing that I want to say is that it is indeed unfortunate and sad that the pattern and profile of violence that we've had over the last 10 years keeps repeating itself. To give you a simple example, in every election since we've monitored, beginning with the local government elections, before Vamba, and then the provincial council elections after Vamba 10 years ago, there are certain electorates or polling divisions in the country, in both the North Central province as well as in the Sabaragamuwa province, that continue to be areas that are prone to high levels of violence. This is over a 10-year period. And in this respect, it is a standing indictment of the political parties and their behavior in those local areas. There can't be something different in the water. It's got to be with regard to the political parties and their behavior in these particular electorates. They have been named. We talked about Rambukana in the Sabaragamuwa province. We talked about Kalavawa, Kakirawa. If you go back and look at our statistics, our records, our reports, whenever there's been an election, these are areas that have been singled out for recording high incidents of violence during a campaign and indeed on election day. The second point that I want to make to you is this, is that over these last 10 years, one of the things that we have increasingly found is that what happens during a campaign does have a direct bearing on what happens on election day. And the issue, therefore, is this, is if all the dirty business has been conducted during a campaign, having a very quiet and peaceful and incident-free election day doesn't tell you very much. And therefore, our appeal has always been to the election commissioner and to the authorities that when you consider the question of the climate in which an election is to be held, do consider the context in which it takes place with regard to a campaign, as well as on election day, what happens outside of a polling station. The incidents that happened yesterday in Anuradhapura, what are the possible consequences of those incidents, and what bearing will those incidents have when it comes to polling on Saturday? Now, some might well argue that the people are so angry at what happened, so angry and appalled by the violence, that they will come out in large numbers. Others might turn around and say, no, because of the gravity of that violence, people are going to be scared to come out. Now, these are issues that we need to take into account if we are really serious about the freeness and fairness of an election. This organization has consistently, from 2 o'clock in the afternoon on the day that the Vamba election was held, when we requested the election commissioner to annul those polls, and that was some 10 years ago, we have consistently come out and appealed to the election commissioner to please annul and reorder a poll wherever it happens. It would be really sad if the commissioner, every time before an election, comes out and says that he's going to do it and never does it. It affects the credibility of the office. It affects the credibility of the only mechanism and recourse one has with regard to enforcing some sort of discipline with regard to the integrity of the electoral process. And I also want to make the point, as Udaya did, that the 17th Amendment does provide for all the independent commissions, etc., and it is not being implemented. But there is one other point with regard to the 17th Amendment. The Elections Commission envisaged under the 17th Amendment was never set up ever. It was the one commission that wasn't. It is also the one commission whose powers are vested in the current holder of that office, and in that current holder only. So the legal and constitutional provision is there to be able to enforce this kind of discipline. I also find it somewhat ironic indeed that at a time when civil society organizations, and indeed you members of the media too, are accused of doing things that are treacherous and detract from the war effort, that the election commissioner has to call in the army in certain areas of the North Central Province and the Anuradhapura district in particular for the conduct of an election. That begs the question as to who is interrupting the work of the security forces and who is detracting from the overarching mandate and priority of the security forces at the present moment. And the answer is very clear. In the Anuradhapura district, it is the political parties, and it is one political party in particular. That is what we have in terms of the reports that we have received as far as incidents of violence are concerned. So I think these are things that really need to be brought out and spoken about, because we go through this exercise time and time again. We even had international observers for elections, albeit general and presidential elections, who came 3 times, made recommendations, and not a single one of them have really been implemented to any effect. So, I mean, I appeal to you as members of the media to follow it not just in terms of reporting incidents, but to look beneath that in terms of what is actually driving this. Why is it that there are certain areas of this country, when it comes to elections over a 10-year period, have a profile of violence? Why is it that political parties don't acknowledge this and take into account that something must be done with regard to it? There are politicians in those areas, and we all know who they are, who have a demonstrable, proven record with regard to engaging in violence. There are some of them, in fact, who have been responsible for beating up some of our monitors in the past as well. Yeah. You really need to look at this, and that is the appeal to the media. That is why we say that you also have a responsibility along with us to actually do something with regard to this. The other point that I want to make is simply this, is that we have to address a fundamental issue here. In the course of this election, because of the expectation of violence, there was also the talk, and there have been incidents, where the response to violence has been further violence. Gahano anang gahano. Yeah. Now, this problem only increases the amount of violence and institutionalizes violence as a way of defending the electoral process. This is absurd. Maybe political parties feel that in order to show their effectiveness, their political virility or whatever on the ground, that they have to hit back. But that is not the way to go, surely. It may well work on the ground for the political parties, but it doesn't work for the health and strength and integrity of our electoral process and of our democracy. So I appeal to all of you as well, is to look at this in terms of the longer term question of how we curb violence and threats to the integrity of the democratic process in Sri Lanka. Any questions? No?